So South African NGO Food Forward SA says it has a sustainable and cost-effective solution to address the country's hunger crisis. In fact, they're proposing that government amend legislation to allow for surplus food to rather be donated to those who need it the most. That's as France made it illegal for food producers to dump edible food. Under French law, the food must be donated to charity, for instance. The proposal is for the amendment of South Africa's Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act to include a donation-specific chapter, so to speak. Let's unpack this for you now. Bring in Food Forward SA's Managing Director, that's Andy du Plessis, who joins us now via our video link. And Andy, it's great to have you on the program, especially on this important issue. I'm reminded always when we speak about hunger, not only in South Africa but the world, that the issue is not so much that there isn't enough food available, it's that this food doesn't reach the people who need it.
Absolutely, that's 100% correct. Thank you, Anyanda, for having us on your show. So 100% in South Africa actually has a net surplus of food. That's why we are able to export grains like maize and other products on a regular basis. Fruits and vegetables as well go into Europe and into Africa on a regular basis. So in South Africa, there's more than enough food, but the problem is roughly 30% of all the food that is produced is lost or wasted because of supply chain inadequacies directly from farm into the manufacturing space, into the retail sector. There's a huge amount of wastage that occurs in the supply chain, and it's estimated at roughly 10 million tons of food that's wasted on an annual basis. And our contention is that if we just took 5 million tons of that food and we intercepted it at the right time, we are able to provide food to roughly 30 million people a day. However, if we had to feed those 30 million people, it would cost us roughly 34 billion rand on an annual basis, while our cost per meal, because of the model that we use, collecting surplus food, only costs us 85 cents to be able to deliver one meal to one person on a daily basis.
Sure, the wastage is staggering. Help us understand where in the supply chain this intervention would have to be inserted for it to be most effective.
So the wastage occurs throughout the supply chain, but most of the waste occurs either on farms, so a farmer grows for a manufacturer or a retailer, and the retailer or that manufacturer will only take within spec goods. So anything that's out of specification, it's got a blemish on, it's too big or it's too small. While it's a perfectly edible product, that goods will not be taken up by whoever's purchasing it. So the farmer has to dump that goods in landfill, which is harmful to the environment, or they have the choice to donate that food to Food Forward South Africa, which is what a lot of farmers are doing, especially through our One Farm Share program, where a number of farmers across the country donate into our organization, which allows us to make sure that 97% of the food that we distribute is surplus food. So in the farming sector, then in the manufacturing sector, so someone that makes grains, for example, if in the manufacturing process something goes wrong and they notice too late that the label was incorrect or the label went skew because of a production glitch, that product can't go on the market either. And a lot of manufacturers are incinerating that stock or dumping it in landfill. And we are saying that should not be happening in a country that has a food security crisis like South Africa. And then on the retail side, although retailers manage their stocks well at their distribution centers, for example, there are huge amounts of food that ends up at surplus because it doesn't go in time to their stores. And we collect those surpluses from our partner retailers like Pick n Pay, Food Lovers Market, Woolworths, and Massmart.
Sure. Help us understand this. I mean, we are now, or at least the organization that you represent, is calling for amendments to legislation to be made. I presume it's because, in your experience, you've seen that certain food that doesn't meet specification but is safe is being discarded. The question, though, is in what ways do we amend this legislation such that it doesn't open the door to people who are hungry essentially getting food that's dangerous for them to consume?
100%. So just to give you some context, Food Forward South Africa has been operating this model, which the surplus food recovery model, since 2009, so 12 years this year, and we've not ever had a food security issue or an issue relating where people got ill or anything like that. So it's definitely possible to be able to do this. What we need to do and what we are calling for government to do is to amend legislation, not to allow for just any food to be able to donate it, but within a certain environment to allow liability protection for manufacturers especially. It's a huge incentive for why they are not, or disincentive why they are not donating that surplus food. So what we are asking government to do is, in consideration of the fact that 10 million tons of food is wasted, and if it's intercepted at the right time, we could use that to address the security crisis. And that 10 million costs our economy roughly 64 billion rand on an annual basis. It warrants government's attention because government does not have the money to be able to feed people by procuring food. And we're saying in South Africa, because there's a net surplus of food, if we were able to recover that food at the right time, we will be able to address our food security crisis at scale without with no problems. And we're saying government needs to look at that as a viable alternative so that we avoid issues where people are desperate, where people are dying. South Africa has one of the highest incidences of stunting, which is a malnutrition-related disease, where 27% of our children that are 0 to 5 years are stunted and they will not recover from that stunting. It's a malnutrition-related disease. South Africa has the opportunity, and our government certainly has the opportunity, to look at legislation to make sure that food that is surplus throughout the supply chain, farmers, manufacturers, wholesalers and retailers, that we are able to rather recover that food at the right time while it is edible, usable and safe for human consumption, and let us use that food to feed people. It costs us just 85 cents to be able to deliver one meal using that model.
Sure. Getting the food to you through amended legislation is just one part of the process. Getting the food to the people who need it is the other. Help us understand whether those distribution channels exist, and if not, what it would take to get them set up.
Absolutely. So Food for South Africa, what we do very well is connect with that supply chain partners, and then we also have a large network of verified and registered non-profit organizations that operate throughout South Africa. At the moment, we've got about 1,350 registered and vetted non-profit organizations that receive food from us every single month, and they reach roughly 750,000 people on a daily basis, and it's enabled because of the food we are able to recover. Last financial year, we recovered 7,200 tons of food from the supply chain, equating to roughly 29 million meals. And we are saying the networks are there, and we are ready to scale up at the right time. But we need enabling legislation from government, and we also need those supply chain partners that are dumping and incinerating good quality edible food. We need them to partner with us and say to them, they need to say that they will donate this food as a good corporate citizen, and we will give them 18A tax certificates for that donation, but we will make sure that the food reaches the intended beneficiaries in its proper form, making sure that health and safety regulations are in place throughout that chain.
Sure. I know a lot of people, typically when this conversation is being had, often get into the realm of discussing theoretically whether a capitalist society actually makes sense. I mean, many of these companies would rather throw the food away than give it to people who need it, because sometimes it just costs too much money for them to be able to sort it out and give it to those who need it. I mean, how high up a list of issues is that for the work that you do?
Yeah, so for our supply chain partners, it's actually a saving when they donate that food to us, because incinerating that stock costs millions of rands and dumping that stock costs millions of rands. So it's actually our organization provides a business-to-business, a B2B solution for those supply chain partners. So by partnering with Food Forward South Africa, they immediately save on their bottom line. But secondly, they are now able to say that surplus food that is going to happen in any case throughout the supply chain, that food will be able to be used to feed people. And because the food is donated to Food Forward South Africa, and because we have an infrastructure of logistics, we're able to go and collect that food from our farmers and from our manufacturers and distribution centers of our retail partners, we are then able to, they are not spending more money, rather they are saving money throughout that whole partnership, and then we are able to use that food to address our growing food security crisis, which we have to make sure that we start to address. When we see the kind of looting and vandalism we saw in KZN in July and would have spread into the rest of the country, we need to make sure that people are fed first so that they are healthy enough to be able to go look for work and make sure that they receive the proper nutrition that they need to be able to grow and develop.
Yeah, you speak about nutrition, and that's exactly where I was hoping we'd go. Of the food being wasted, are you able to get a sense of which or what kind of food mostly goes to waste? Or is it generally our consumption levels are just so bad that anything and everything that shouldn't go to waste, unfortunately, goes to these dump sites?
We actually have a very good idea of where most of the food wastage occurs, or food surplus occurs. We prefer to call it food surplus because the opportunity to save that food is there. So according to WWF's 2018 food loss and waste report, about 50% of that food waste is occurring on farms or in pack houses and throughout the packing and manufacturing process. Roughly 50% of that is happening there, and a further 25% is happening on the wholesale and the retail side. Only 5% occurs on the consumer side. So in South Africa, most consumers that's not where the food wastage is occurring. It's on the pre-consumer side, on farms, in production and pack houses, on the manufacturing side, and in the retail sector. So we know exactly where that food is being wasted. And, government needs to be able to create an enabling environment and provide liability protection for our manufacturers especially, so that we are able to unlock that surplus food that is there, but is being lost or wasted simply because we are not intercepting it in time.
Very quickly then, Andy, how far are you in your efforts to try to get this legislation amended so you can do what needs to be done?
So for the past 3 years, we have been engaging with national government. We've also presented this to the Democratic Alliance and the ANC in the hopes that they would take this piece of legislation further. We've actually given them the draft legislation to be able to start the process, and that it's fallen on deaf ears. But we are now working with the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, and the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa is in discussions with the Office of the President. And in the presidency, we do hope that someone there, that it will land well with those that really will look into the future and realize that because we have this prolonged pandemic that we are facing, and prior to the pandemic, we already had an economic and social crisis because of the huge inequality. We're hoping someone there will realize that there is a model that is available, that is cost effective, that is scalable, and that someone will be able to enact legislation around this, like you mentioned in your introduction, which is what France is doing and has been very successful. So we're working with the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, and we're hoping the Office of the Presidency will be able to look into this and provide some answers and help us start the road around building legislation for liability protection, for making sure that food that is edible and usable, that it's not dumped in landfill or incinerated, but rather that we use that food to address our food security crisis, especially in our vulnerable children and our pregnant and nursing mothers that need food desperately.
Andy, from your lips to God's ears, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us around this incredibly important issue. Andy du Plessis is the Managing Director at NGO Food Forward South Africa. Once again, thanks very much indeed.